I'm going to show you how to use Wisewand's bulk mode, the mode that lets you publish several articles at once on Wisewand without the hassle of doing it case by case, one article after another, which is also perfectly doable, by the way. But I'm going to show you what happens when you decide to do several at the same time. You'll simply click on articles right here, then on multiple, and I've prepared a little window for you with 5 articles. Specifically, we're going to schedule them together, and I'll show you exactly what the best practices are for generating this type of article. So first you enter here, for example, the title of your article. So here it could be, or simply a keyword. So I'm going to enter the titles directly. So I'll click on keep the title. But I could have just put, for example, Avicloud code here, and I would have had an article that targets the keyword Avis Cloud Code, and so it decides the title itself. But in this case, I'm going to choose to do it this way. And then what we strongly recommend you do is to leave a little space between, by the way, I'll show you on the interface. So you have a keyword or an article topic, and you can absolutely just use the topic. And then add sources afterwards. Now, that's not necessarily obvious if you're not familiar with it. That's why I'm making this video for you. In this case, for Avis Cloud Code, I'm going to look for interesting articles. On this specific topic, I carefully copy the entire source material, so the article itself. I copy it right after the article I want. I press the spacebar to create a separation, and then I navigate back to find another relevant piece of information that I previously discovered. That's quite interesting too, so I hit the spacebar again and add it to the collection. And actually, by doing this, you're going to prompt Wisewand to draw inspiration from it, not the content itself, but to look inside those pages, which you presumably found interesting for specific information related to that content. This is something Wisewand does very naturally, and you'll see as well, if you don't put anything, you're absolutely not required to add a source. Wisewand will be able to analyze the SERP itself, meaning the search results, and decide on its own what to look for or not. So it's entirely up to you whether you want to do it. In local SEO, the ultimate guide to generating leads with a network of sites, I'm going to take the guide. Right here, the one I found, so it can look for information inside it. And I'm also going to get the next guide I found, so both guides on the topic, which I'm once again adding as sources. For MCPs, same principle. I typed in MCP, what is it? And I came across 2 guides about MCP as well. So same thing here, I found them quite relevant, so I'm adding them for it to use. And you'll see that both the context protocol model, it's the same, it's related to MCP. But on the other hand, the last 2 topics, automating your online business with AI, this workflow, we're going to let Wisewand handle it completely automatically. And Microsas in 2026, how to create and launch a profitable software with AI. Again, we're going to let it do this completely automatically. Now, you have the option to restrict the sources. So what does that mean? Wisewand will not retrieve any sources other than the URLs provided in the topics. So in this case, I could do it, but I'm going to decide not to. And I'm going to let Wisewand, in which I have complete trust, go and find additional sources to enrich the content it will ultimately create for me. Next, keep the title. So in this case, I click on keep the title because I've already given it titles directly and not just keywords. The language is French, so that's fine. And it will be published directly on one of my sites called impactteam.com. So here I'm simply going to leave it with that site. For the persona, you need to select, very important, the persona you previously created in the persona section. So for me, it will be the persona called Discord. And as for the length, I have to admit, I like to leave it on automatic. So I let Wisewand decide based on my competitors what the right length for the content should be. So there you go, it handles that part on its own. Now that that's done, I'm going to set up the advanced brief. So you have the option to add what's called a brief summary box. This is a small box at the beginning of your content that summarizes the important information. I like that, so I include it. The table of contents, I decide to add that too. The information tables, I keep them, as well as the bullet lists and the links. I don't necessarily need links, and as for external sources, I don't really need those either. So in this case, I'm not going to check those options. I'll check cover images, and here you can configure it based on your site's main color and choose whether you want a portrait or a landscape format. Personally, I'll leave it in landscape and let it do whatever it wants in terms of colors. Images in the content, I'll also decide to check that option. And in this case, I'll also decide to have 2 images in the content per article. So I'll add that here. Internal linking, I have to admit this feature in Wisewand is extremely powerful. So I really encourage you to use it, but it will only work if you properly connect a website, if it's properly linked to a project, so to a website. If you create articles without linking them to your website, Wisewand won't be able to do the internal linking. That is the internal links from one article to another. In my case, I've linked my site, so I can do my internal linking. Bolded words, I'm going to check that option as well. Quotes, I'm not particularly interested in that. Rich formatting, I could enable it. I admit I'm going to leave it unchecked, but it does allow you to add little tips, formatted tables, CTA blocks. You'll be able to enhance your layout a bit. Interactive widget, this lets you add all sorts of little... All right, let's check it for science. Let's see what happens. FAQ, I'll leave it as is. Audio, I'll leave that too, but you can generate an audio version linked to each of your pieces of content, which can be added at the top of your article, for example, on the webbook and social networks. I'm not checking that either. Once that's done, you can go to publications if you've directly connected a site. And I'm going to tell it, I want you to publish on the site called Impact YM in the category. Let's see if there's a category that's more suitable. So I'll leave it on automatic. So Wisewand will be able to decide whether or not to publish in this or that category. And as for the author, it will be myself, so I'll leave it like that. Once that's done, I click on direct publication, and once again, I click on generate. So what I suggest is that we meet again in a few moments to check out together the results of these different articles. So the articles, we can see them right here, they're in the queue. So the generation shouldn't take long to start. And I'll be able to show you the results of this content. Once that's done, you can see that the articles are starting to process slowly but surely. For your information, it takes on average between 10 and 15 minutes per piece of content. There are a lot of things happening behind the scenes in creating content so that in the end you get quality material. And that's why it doesn't generate in just a few seconds or minutes. Well, a few minutes, yes, but it does take a little bit of time. Good content takes time. And we'll be right back with the results. Okay, it's actually been a little while since it finished. So as expected, it took a few minutes to generate each article. So now let's go take a look at one of the articles. Right here, we have the featured image. There are images within the content, the title, and the meta description. Everything was generated properly. We have the little summary box we talked about and requested. We have the two well-known images that were generated with diagrams about Cloud Code. There's a small tool that was generated here as well to automatically add a bit more substance inside the article. Here's the second image that was generated right here. Tables, slightly improved formatting with some little ideas. Take the time to plan before starting the machine. An initial prompt. It saves you from unnecessary back and forth. To avoid this blockage, check out POI Model EA as an alternative to access various models. We have a bit of time, but be careful. You're going to save time. It's crazy how much time you save on raw writing, but be careful, you gain in writing speed. Anyway, the formatting is really nice. The article is ready to be published.